Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 27 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in.
Let's talk about communication. Communication in marriage is, it's often misunderstood. But before I dive in, I want to talk to you about someone whom I've never met in person. We've just communicated online. And she and her husband actually have been in couples therapy for, 18 months, 2 years. They've been going round and round, and they must get some benefit or they wouldn't continue, but it's definitely not making the difference that they wanted to make. So she went ahead and bought the Aligned and Hot Marriage Program, my signature program, which shows you how to develop closeness and connection, emotional intimacy in such a way that lubricates the path to sensual and sexual intimacy. Very often couples think, we need to focus on the bedroom. And sometimes that's definitely true, but there's no reason to start focusing on what's going on in the bedroom unless you feel really good, really clear that what's happening when you're not having sex is nourishing, supportive, intimate, connected, and really working for both of you. So anyway, despite having worked with a couples therapist for quite a while now, she went ahead and purchased the Aligned and Hot Marriage Program. And 4 days later, she messaged me and said, I purchased your course and have already gone through the first 2 modules. I already see a difference in just a few short days. Our communication is better than it's been in a long time. Now, on the one hand, it's absolutely lovely to receive such a message. I am so happy for her and him that they're having this experience. But also, I'm not surprised because this is, in some ways, a simple program. It's simple in the sense that it's very easy to follow. It's very easy to implement, but the impact is far from simple. It is efficient. It is profound. It's electric. And I'm sharing this with you because starting March 1st, when you use coupon code marriage first, I'll put that in the show notes, but basically just spell marriage and then the number 1 and then ST, marriage first. When you use that coupon code, then you can take 30% off. Learn from me, learn how to really connect more meaningfully with your spouse. And you've been eyeing the Aligned and Hot Marriage Program, or maybe this is the very first you've ever heard of it. But either way, this is a really fantastic opportunity because when you use coupon code marriage first, you'll get 30% off the program through March 5th. So don't delay. Go ahead and see the difference in your own relationship. Now, whether or not you go for it and register for the Aligned and Hot Marriage Program, I'm going to give you some juicy tidbits about communication in marriage. Now, one of the things about communication in marriage, which it comes up so often that you don't even think about it coming up, but it's there. And that is that we think when communication doesn't go well, it's the job of the person speaking to learn to speak more clearly, more eloquently, more comprehensively, more successfully. the feeling of frustration when you don't really understand one another, the way to fix that, so long as the other person is paying attention, is that the person speaking needs to speak better. Definitely, successful communication involves the person speaking doing so well. But I really want to call your attention to the contribution of the person who is listening. Let me start by telling you about clients of mine. When I worked with them a few years ago, I think they've been married for 15 years at that point. They had 3 young children and they loved one another, but she especially felt sort of generally discontent, and he definitely did not feel appreciated, which takes a toll over time. So in his mind, what he was thinking but never saying was, I worked so hard to provide for our family. I mean, she worked also, but he really worked intensive hours and pushed himself in his career. And he did it to provide because he loved her and the children. For him, pretty much every day was an expression of his devotion, because if he didn't love her and them, if he didn't love his family, if he wasn't devoted to providing for them, he probably would have changed careers to something that was a lot less stressful, lower pay, but so what? That wasn't what was motivating him. Of course, there are many people who work really hard for a variety of different reasons, but in his case, he was doing it because he wanted to provide for his wife and children, because he loves them. And one of her biggest complaints, which didn't come out right away, but ultimately was revealed as something that influenced her every day, is that he never said, I love you. She was looking for verbal expression of his love. Now, we could sort of take the kind of conventional road and say, oh, this is a matter of love language, a need for translation in the love languages, his love language being acts of service and hers being affirmations, verbal communications. And there is some truth in that, but I don't want to go in that direction. I want to go in the direction of saying that when she opened herself, when she shifted how she was listening, when she was able to receive things without them coming in the one specific way she wanted, she was flooded with gratitude. She was flooded with the awareness of his love because she knew how hard he worked. And when she shifted how she was, quote, listening, and the message landed, then all of their communication benefited. Now, he also learned to actually say, I love you. And so she got both. But if she had blocked herself from hearing it in his actions, it would have been much more difficult for him to actually speak what was so obvious. I'm going to give you another example. I think actually I talked about it on the podcast, ages ago. The podcast has been going now for 3 years. And so I think sometime, I don't know, in the first year maybe, I'm not sure when, but I know I told this story before because it's an iconic story in my own marriage. But years ago, let me preface it by saying that I spent 7 years living in Maryland, in Annapolis, on the water with fresh fish markets, and actually my boyfriend was a professional sailor. And so a lot of our life was around the water. And so I was very familiar with lots of different kinds of fish, more than the usual in the regular grocery store. And so the fish names, I didn't just perceive it as fish. I perceived it as mussels, clams, shrimp, crab, lobster. They were all totally different kinds of foods for me. My husband, he lived in Boston, lived in Queens. I suppose technically that's on the water, but he didn't have a life that was on water, and certainly hasn't had a life with a lot of variety in fish consumption. So one day I made mussels and I cooked them. I served them for dinner, and we're at the table, and he says to me, would you please pass the clams? And I said, what? And he said, I want to have some more clams. And I just looked at him. I had no idea what he was talking about. And he was offended. he thought I was teasing him, that I was being rude and like ignoring him. And here was a man who was at the dinner table. He was hungry. He wanted to have more of what I was serving. He asked for some more clams. And I knew he was well-meaning. I knew he was getting super frustrated with me. And I also knew equally well that we did not actually have any clams on the table. And so he was asking me to pass the clams, but I didn't have any clams to pass. And then I said, "Oh, you mean mussels? Here, sweetheart." And I was very happy to pass them. But he was really annoyed. It took him a long time to realize that I actually had no idea what he was talking about when he was asking me to pass the clams. And from his point of view, it's like, well, it obviously wasn't the broccoli and it wasn't the salad. And, you know, he wasn't randomly asking for sushi. But for me, what I needed to do for that communication to become successful, and now whenever I don't know what he's talking about, I think of mussels and clams and try to figure it out, looking at it from his perspective. But in any case, the main thing that I changed was how I listened. So the way that I would describe that is when he was asking for clams, initially I was just listening from the point of view of syntax, grammar, and vocabulary. It was a very intellectual matter. He was asking for clams and I was going by the vocabulary. In other words, I was listening with my head and I wasn't getting any information. And I could see that he was getting frustrated. And I knew that the frustration was based on something real. So the first thing that I did as a listener here was I didn't just dismiss him. I didn't think he was nuts. I understood that something was happening for him and I was missing it. And so then I softened, and instead of getting frustrated from the perspective of vocabulary, I dropped into my heart. Now, if you know what I mean, great. If you don't know what I mean is I brought my attention to my heart. It's like I tried to listen with my heart. Now, anatomically speaking, my heart doesn't have ears, but energetically speaking, it does. And as soon as I opened my heart, I realized what he wanted. It's not because he ever actually understood why I didn't know what he was talking about. It's not because he pointed to the dish containing the mussels. It's because he continued to ask for what he wanted, saying the same thing and just getting more frustrated, but basically speaking the same thing. And I shifted from a normal communication to opening to perceive more. I often talk about this as listening generously, as opening up to receive more of the communication than I typically need when the two of us are communicating. And with that, I realized what he wanted and was very happy to pass it so that he could enjoy the rest of his meal. So what I hope that you take from this episode is that if you're feeling frustrated, well, it could be that your partner is not actually saying what you want to hear. That's possible. You may want to hear something and that communication is not available, but it is also possible that that communication is available. And the main way that you can receive it is by shifting how you listen. So play with that. Become a listening researcher. In fact, I'm reminded, this is very funny. It's not exactly the point I'm making, but I'm reminded of it. You know, audiologists measure people's hearing in order to know, well, many things, but one of the things they do is measure people's hearing in order to know if someone needs a hearing aid to amplify sound. And I don't remember the statistic now because I heard this so long ago, but I think it's something like, I don't know, 60%, I don't actually remember, but some significant percentage of work for audiologists is women who bring their husbands to have their hearing tested because they think there's a problem, an anatomical, physiological problem with their hearing, when in fact their hearing is totally fine. What they really need is some help with their attention. So that's also true. And even if you have your attention on your spouse's speaking, I invite you to have it in this generous way that I'm describing, because I can't tell you how many communications might have led to resentment, misunderstanding, and conflict, which in my marriage and in the marriages of so many of my clients and people who go through the Aligned and Hot Marriage program, where I don't talk about it this way, but in there you learn all kinds of ways to listen generously, that when you listen generously, that is really the best immunization against intensified resentment and conflict. So play with this. And even if there isn't a misunderstanding, even if you do understand what's being said, is there a way that you can play with listening more generously, hearing more than you normally do when the same communication is being made, and responding accordingly? This is my invitation to see the riches in your communications. As I say this, I have an image of all the different layers of the earth. We walk around with an experience of just, the topsoil, but there's so much more underneath. And I think of communication in the same way. So if your topsoil communications are not going well, consider listening for layers underneath. And if your topsoil communications are going well, also listen for the layers underneath, because there's so much richness and intimacy available when you just presence your heart, have your attention on your own heart while you listen to what your beloved is saying. And before I complete, I want to remind you again of the 30% coupon code Marriage First. Put your marriage first, put communication and intimacy first, and take advantage of the 30% discount on the Aligned and Hot Marriage program, which is good March 1st through March 5th.